Meet Jesse Newton. This is Jesse. He's a devoted husband and father from Little Rock, Arkansas, and this is his story. He says, so last week, something pretty tragic happened in our household. It's taken me until now to wrap my head around it and find the words to describe the horror. It started out simple enough, something that's probably happened to most of you. Sometime between midnight and 1:30 a.m., our puppy Evie pooped on our rug in the living room. This is the only time she's done this, so it's probably not just because we forget. It's probably just because we forget to let her out before we went to bed that night. Now, if you have a detective's mind, you may be wondering how we know the poop occurred between midnight and 1:30 a.m. We were asleep, so how do I know that time frame? Why, friends, it's because our Roomba runs at 1:30 a.m. every night while we sleep, and it found the poop. And so begins the pooptastrophe, the poopocalypse, the poopening. If you have a Roomba, please rid yourself of all distractions and absorb everything I'm about to tell you. Do not, under any circumstances, let your Roomba run over dog poop. If the unthinkable does happen and your Roomba runs over dog poop, stop it immediately and do not let it continue the cleaning cycle. Because if that happens, it will spread the dog poop over every conceivable surface within its reach, resulting in a home that closely resembles a Jackson Pollock poop painting. And in case you don't know who Jackson Pollock is, Jesse's provided his own drawing to illustrate what he's talking about. Strangely, it's in brown. It will be on your floorboards. It will be on your furniture legs. It will be on your carpets. It will be on your rugs. It will be on your kids' toy boxes. If it's near the floor, it will have poop on it. Those awesome wheels, which have a checkered surface for better traction, left 25-foot poop trails all over the house. Our lovable Roomba, who gets a careful cleaning every night, looked like it had been mudding. Yes, mudding, like what you do with a Jeep on a pipeline road, but in poop. Now, the moral of Jesse's story for us this morning is that there are things that are intended to clean up our mess that can actually make the mess messier. Sometimes when we address the mess, we can make it worse. We've been saying throughout this series, and this is the last week of the series, we've been saying, I know a mess when I see one because I am one. We know a mess when we see one because we are messes. And it's comforting to me to know this morning, and I hope to you as well, is that Jesus knows all of us. In fact, there used to be a song we used to sing that sang, Jesus knows all about our troubles. Well, you know what? Jesus knows all about our messes. He knows about our messes as individuals. He knows about our messes as families, and he knows about our messes in larger groups than that. Jesus can see our mess clearly. He sees it and can call it out in us anytime. I know this because of a story of Jesus in John chapter 4, where he encounters a woman at a well in Samaria, and he begins this conversation with her. Now, the woman has come to the well in the middle of the day, which is not the time that you normally come to the well. She came to the well in the middle of the day, probably hoping that there wouldn't be too many people there. And Jesus begins a conversation with her by saying, woman, give me a drink of water. Give me a drink of water. Now this surprises the woman, first of all, because Men do not speak to women in public like that in her day. But even more than that, she recognizes him as a Jew. And Jews do not have any kinds of relationships with Samaritans. In fact, they certainly wouldn't drink out of the same vessel. And so begins this discussion with this woman that Jesus has, who says to her, "Give me a drink, and if you give me a drink, you may find that I have living water to give to you." And in this discussion, as they're going along discussing water and living water, and she's saying things like, "The well is deep and you don't even have a bucket. How am I going to get you some water? You can't drink out of the same vessel that I'm drinking out of." All of this discussion, and suddenly Jesus stops her in her tracks by saying, "Go get your husband." Here's the scripture. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, this living water you're talking about, so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." And he told her, "Go get your husband and come back." She says to him, "I don't have a husband." And Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is that you've had 5 husbands. And the man you have now is not your husband." Jesus knows this woman and knows the thing that probably would cause her the most embarrassment is her own life with the opposite sex, her own connection with men. Now, to be fair, we tend to look at this and we think, well, this woman must have been some kind of person who who had a bad reputation. Probably true. But the truth is that only men could seek divorce in her day. And so this woman is not so much someone who is promiscuous and just counting up the number of marriages that she can have and all of that. Instead, this woman is someone who's been victimized by the system of marriage in her day. In fact, she's been used up by 4 husbands, and now another man won't marry her. Probably not. And yet Jesus says to her the thing that probably she wanted to keep most hidden. That's why she came to the well in the middle of the day. "Where is your husband?" And he brings out the mess so that he can address the mess in her life. Jesus will do the same thing for you and for me. We may want to talk to Jesus about a lot of things, but when we go to him, we oftentimes will find out he says, "That right there is what we want to talk about." No, we don't. Yes, we want to talk about the mess. And that conversation with that woman ends so fantastically because they start talking about religion, and then she says, someday the Messiah is going to come, and he'll explain everything to us. And Jesus says to her something that he didn't say to many people. He said, "Woman, the one you're talking to is he. I am the one you've been hoping for. The one that all of Israel and Samaria too has been hoping for. I am the one." The woman leaves her water jug because now she's found a different kind of water and runs into the city, into the town, to tell everyone, "Come and see this man who told me everything I've ever done." That's how Jesus addresses the mess in our lives. He knows us. He knows our history. He knows our life. Nothing is hidden from him. And if we let him address our mess, then we'll have some very good news too. Now, not only does Jesus know our messes as individuals, not only that, but I want to tell you this morning that Jesus knows about the mess of people that we call the church. He knows about this mess that we call the church. Many times in the world, people are the church is not enjoying the best of times in terms of our reputation and favor among people in the world, because they look at the church and they obviously think, what a mess. And sometimes I'm tempted to think, Jesus, look at our church, look at us, aren't we a mess? Each one of us personally is a mess, and then when you put us all together, oh my, the messes just multiply, and the mess gets greater and greater and greater. And you're the head of the church, and it's your church. We belong to you, and we are your bride. We belong to you. Don't you see what's going on? And that's a dumb question, because yeah, he does. Not only does he see it now, but he saw what the church was going to be in the future. How do I know that? Because he tells us a story about the mess that the church was going to be. In Matthew chapter 13, Jesus says it this way. He told them another story, a parable. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. He's got a field. He sows good seed in it. And in this field, while everyone was sleeping, his enemy comes and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. And when the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. So a man's got a good field, plants good seed, but while he's sleeping, the enemy plants weeds. And when he wakes up, it's dandelions everywhere, right? Weeds are everywhere. The owner's servants come to him, and they see the field, and they say, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from? An enemy did this, he replied, and the servants asked him, well then, do you want us to go and pull up the weeds? Do you want us to go and get rid of that problem for you? Do you want us to address the mess that is your field? And he says to them, no. Because while you're pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, and then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. Now get this. Jesus compares his church, his kingdom, his people, to a very messy garden. And it seems to be okay for it to be that way for now. Are you getting this? I don't know how many are gardeners, but I don't know a gardener that I've ever met who would allow this condition to exist. And yet Jesus allows his garden, his people, to be this mixture of good wheat and weeds. He allows them to dwell together in the same field. And welcome to the church. Because Jesus knew that the church would be this way. He knew that his people were going to be a mixture of people who were going to be true and fruitful because they had good seed in them. But even among them, the enemy was going to bring phonies. The enemy was going to allow that bad seed, the weeds, to come into this as well. He knew that both the good seed and the bad seed, the wheat and the weeds, were going to be in the same field. He knew that there would be phonies in the church alongside those who are real. And how did this happen? Obviously, the master plants good seed, but the enemy makes sure that there's weeds there as well. Now, what do we do about that mess? When people see the church and they say it's a mess, we should go, yeah, that's right. We know that. This field is full of wheat, good wheat. But yeah, there's weeds too. It's all there. It's all there. And we, like the good servants in the story, say, Lord, let us at him. Let's pull the weeds out, right? Let's get rid of the weeds in this field. Let us pull the weeds out. And the most fascinating thing is that Jesus says, no. Don't mess with the mess that is my people. Don't mess with this weed-filled garden that also has wheat in it. And do you know why he refuses to let the servants to pull the weeds from the field? He says to them, you're not qualified. We are not qualified to clean up the church. We're not qualified to do that. The master says, leave the field to me. Leave it alone for now. And listen to it. He tells us why. He says, first of all, if I turn you loose to pull up weeds out of the church, if I turn you loose to pull up weeds out of this field, you might accidentally pull up some wheat. You might pull up something, you think something looks like a weed, but you're not the expert here. There are people in the church who you think they're phony, they're not right, they're a hypocrite, they're whatever. And we would say, out with them. But the master of the field says, leave them alone. You don't even know. Because I'm the expert. I'm the one who can see what's going on in the hearts of people. So don't be pulling out people. Don't be kicking people out. Leave them alone. We think we can tell the difference, but only the master really knows what's going on in the hearts of his people in the field. We don't know each other well enough. We have to be very careful in our relationships among this field, right? We have to be very careful because, honestly, depending on how engaged you are, and I think we all ought to get way more engaged. We really ought to get to know each other better. One of the reasons we have grow groups is because we know that if we only see each other for an hour on Sunday morning, our relationships can't help but be superficial, surface. Remember that whenever you start to judge the person sitting next to you this morning, whenever you start to look at someone who walks in here for the first time, whenever you start to do that, you don't know them. We really don't. And it's only if we pursue relationships with one another that we can have more insight. But the truth is, especially when it comes to discerning who's the phony and who's the real one, you don't know. Jesus says, leave it alone. You start doing that, you start trying to address my mess, and you'll pull up some of the good stuff. Leave it alone. We don't know each other well enough. Not only that, but when Jesus plants a field, it's not just a normal field. This field has this amazing quality to it, this miraculous quality to it, because it's God's work. It's God's field. It's Jesus' field. The one who taught that we could actually be born again no matter what our age is, you know? So in this amazing garden that we call the church, he doesn't want you to try to pull out any weeds, because in this garden, in this context, even this morning, a bad seed can become a good seed. See, this master not only provides a place for good seed to grow, but he can take the heart of a bad seed and change it in an instant. So that that which was planted by the enemy to be a weed can be transformed into fruitful wheat for the master. That's my story. Is that your story? Some of us have that story. I was a hypocrite. I was a liar. I used to hate the church. I showed up just to criticize people, right? But one morning, it all started coming true, and I could see no one else except me and my mess. And God began to change me. And I don't criticize anymore. All I can see is that he's been so merciful to me. And my life is on the right path now. I'm doing good. I'm part of this great garden. So Jesus says, let it be. Let the seed, let the wheat and the weeds grow together. Let the mess remain. You can only make it messier if you try to pull it out. Sometimes we still have these people who serve the church. And God bless them, because a lot of people are in God's kingdom today because of these traveling evangelists, okay? It used to be a very effective method to reach people for Christ. You know, it really did work at one time. But every now and then, as a pastor, an evangelist comes and he decides, I'm going to pull the weeds out this week. You know, this week I'm going to preach in this revival or something, and we're going to pull out some weeds. And how do I know about these kinds of evangelists? Because I'm a pastor. And sometimes it has taken me weeks and weeks to clean up the mess that one of God's servants, who's intent on pulling out weeds and cleaning it all up in one weekend, takes a week sometimes for a pastor to help a congregation to say, well, you know, not everything that person said was true, and, you know, you're loved, and we're not, you know, what they said was not necessarily what Jesus would say. Are you hearing what I'm saying? I don't mean to be too critical of our evangelists, but because a lot of people got saved in those revivals too. But every now and then, someone who wants to clean up the mess actually makes it messier. So leave it alone. He'll sort it out. He'll sort it out. The church is meant to be a mess in this age. One day, everything by the master who sees and truly knows who we are and what our hearts are about, he'll separate us. But right now, leave the mess. Leave the mess. It's the way it is. And we're part of the mess ourselves. We have to get over this kind of thing that we want to fix what's wrong with everybody else. We want to address other people's mess. Oh, years ago, a psychiatrist named Sigmund Freud, you might have heard of him, he declared this law of projection, he called it, a law of projection. The law of projection is a way for our minds to deal with aspects of our own character that we consider to be flawed. Are you with me? We've got a problem. I've got a problem in me, a flaw that I see in me. But as a defense mechanism to keep me from having to face up to what's wrong with me, I project that flaw onto others. It's like I've got this movie projector in my head, and every time I look at someone else, I'm putting on them what's going on in me. Rather than addressing our own flaw, we find a way to address it in a situation where it's free from personal connotation. See, if I can take my mess and put it onto you, then I don't have to deal with it. In other words, we choose to address our mess by seeing it in others. We may use this law negatively to condemn or criticize others, or positively by trying to fix the flaw. We may have compassion and really want to help. But by projecting our messes, we can avoid having to consciously identify them, take ownership of them, and deal with them as our own. Now, this law of projection was first taught by Sigmund Freud, a great psychologist, 100 years ago. But listen, Jesus taught this a long time before that, almost 2,000 years ago. Jesus understood it and said it in a way that a child could understand it, in a way that's kind of humorous as well. Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says this: "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye?" Are you seeing this picture? I think those of us who have been in church long enough or read the Bible enough, we know this so well. We're like, oh yeah, I remember Jesus said that, yeah. But we miss the humor of it. Are you getting this? You know, can I help you with that speck in your eye? You know, why you got this 2x4, right? You got this 2x4. Maybe you got two of them, you know. Honey, let me help you. Bam, you know. Watch out for that, right? This speck that we think we want to fix someone else is only evidence of a larger problem that's in us. And have you noticed that in the story, the sawdust and the plank are made out of the same material? See what's going on here? Jesus, he didn't call it the law of projection, but he saw that in us, we would see part of what the problem is in us. We would project that onto others and say, let me fix it in you, and ignore it in myself. Let me fix your mess, and forgetting about the mess that's in us. We ignore the plank in our own eye while trying to get the sawdust out of our brother's eye. We live in this, don't we? If we really understand the law of projection, we realize we live in a hall of mirrors. We're taking that that bugs us and putting it onto others. You see, what you'll find is what bugs you is in you, right? And we're projecting that onto others. We live in a hall of mirrors. We have ways to say this. It takes one to know one, right? You spot it, you got it, right? He who smelt it, dealt it. The pot calls the kettle black. We are what we see in others. What bugs us in others is in us. So what does Jesus say to do about this problem? He says, you hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye. It's so obvious. Take care of this 2x4 that's sticking out of your eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck in your brother's eye. You've got to work on your mess before you ever have a hope of helping anybody else. The cool thing about this law of projection is that it can become it can become a positive thing. See, we have a way of saying seeing is believing, but the truth is believing is seeing. What if, through the grace of God, this projection, this in my eye, what if, through the grace of God, I face it fully and bring it to Christ, and he begins to work on it? So much so that when I turn my eyes upon him, and what fills my mind and my eye now is the image of Jesus. What fills my heart and my mind and my eye now is his great mercy and grace and love for me. That he allowed me to live with such a foolish projection in my eye, and forgave me and graced me and accepted me. And if that begins to fill my mind, then guess what happens then when I look at my neighbor? See what I'm doing? I'm projecting upon them the love of Christ now. I'm projecting upon them Jesus himself, so that I can begin to see Christ in everyone. Jesus said, I was hungry. You gave me something to eat. When, Lord? When did we see you hungry? Well, when you fed the least of these, that was really me. Right? We begin to see Christ. A mind full of Christ and aware of his love and mercy begins to project mercy onto others and begins to project Christ onto others. And we realize that we don't love Jesus because we come to church. We love Jesus everywhere, and we see him in everyone. And so we're free to love God with all of our heart and love our neighbors as ourselves. And our speck-picking days are over because now we can see people like he does. So how do we address this mess? How do we address the plank in our own eye? Can I tell you how important this is? This is our defining moment. When you make the decision to address your own mess, when you make the decision to deal with you, with the plank in your own eye, our defining moment happens when and how we choose to address our mess. Now, this is a very crucial moment. When you decide to deal with your mess, it's a crucial moment because with that decision to address your mess comes a prepackaged, a whole bunch of bad options, and they can only make it messier. You can make a mess trying to get the sawdust out of somebody else's eye while you've got a plank in your own eye. You can mess this up. You can run your Roomba over a lot of stuff. Okay? Here's some things to think about when you think about addressing your mess and how to do it. One day, listen, one day your mess is going to be reduced. It seems huge right now, but one day your mess is going to be reduced to a sentence or two. One day, when you talk about your mess, here's what you're going to say. I went through a really bad divorce. That's what you're going to say. One day you're going to say, I was fired from my job. One day you're going to say, I had an affair, or my spouse had an affair. One day you're going to say, I flunked out of school. One day you might say, things got rough and we had to declare bankruptcy. See, every mess comes prepackaged with some bad options, and it's the way you respond to your mess, the way you begin to clean up your own mess, that will be the real story. The mess will get reduced to a sentence or two. But the rest that happens afterwards, that becomes your story. So what story do you want to tell? How do you want to make this mess into a message? How do you want to do that? And you can mess it up. You can make it messier. Which of the options do you want to make a permanent part of your story? Because the story that comes after the mess is what's going to last. You don't want to opt for something that's going to make you a liar for life. Someone says, so you went through a divorce? Tell me about that. Made up story. Oh, really? What about that? Well, made up story. What about that? Made up story. And before you know it, you're going to be a liar for life. So you had financial trouble and had to declare bankruptcy. Made up story. Well, tell me, what about, how did that happen? Well, it made up story. You're faking it. You're covering it over. And you're left with a life full of hypocrisy because you've never really addressed your mess in an honest way. Don't opt for something that makes you a hypocrite for the rest of your life. When you address your mess, don't make a message that looks like hypocrisy. And this is most important. Listen very carefully here. Young people, a lot of our young people are gone today, but young people, older people, all of us need to hear this. You do not use someone's bad behavior as an excuse to behave badly yourself. See what I'm talking about? Here's your mess. And the way you're going to address your mess is you're going to say, well, if they hadn't had that speck in their eye, if the church hadn't been full of weeds, you hear me? Right? If I hadn't been through 4 husbands already and was on my 5th, do you hear what I'm saying? We blame that and then we excuse all of our plank actions because of a speck in somebody else's eye. And that only makes life messier. So when you finally come to terms with the fact that I've got a plank in my eye and I've got a mess going on in my life, when you finally get to that, what you do from that point on makes all the world of difference. Because you're either going to make it messier or you're trusting in the truth to set you free and to allow Christ to begin to clean up the mess in your life. And then your mess suddenly becomes a message. And you'll reduce the mess to one sentence. I went through a divorce. Bad marriage. But what's your message? I flunked out of school. Oh, what'd you do about that? Here's the message, We had to declare bankruptcy. Oh, that's a mess. What's your message? I had an affair. Oh, what's the mess? But what's the message? Do you see what I'm saying? The woman at the well had a mess. Jesus knew about it. But because she trusted in him, we've been sharing her message with you 2,000 years. You heard it today. So here's some cautions. You'll be tempted to make your mess messier. Once you recognize it, watch out. Don't make it messier. Think through what you're going to do. The real story isn't your mess, it's how you respond. We're so tempted to add more water to our flood. And then be aware of this. Quick fixes look good, but quick fixes equal quicksand. The quick fixes of telling a lie, one lie, and it'll be over. Start to live a fake life of a hypocrite, right? You'll get stuck in that. One lie will be upon another, upon another, upon another. The quick fix is a trap. It's quicksand. Stay out of it. Go the route of getting the plank out of your eye completely. It may take longer, but it'll set you free. And you won't be stuck in a false identity, a fake story. You'll be free. And you'll have a message for everyone else. So Jesus invites you to address your mess today. Not the mess of others, not the mess of the church, not the mess of everybody else who ever did you wrong. Your mess today. To begin this long process of getting rid of the plank in your own eye so that you can truly see and follow him. And when you do, he takes the responsibility for the outcome of the rest of your journey. And your mess will simply be the context for the rest of the story. And that's the way to address your mess. Let's stand together. Wherever you're at this morning, you can be confident in knowing that Jesus knows your mess. He knows your mess. You're not going to show him anything that he doesn't already know. And he loves you anyway. He is not offended by your mess. He is not put off by it. In fact, Jesus tends to go towards your mess because only he can release us from it. Only he can transform it into a message. He knows you, and yet he loves you, and he wants to address the mess in your life. This morning, as we close in a brief prayer, you can just say to him, Lord, here it is. You know all about it. Would you help me to begin to clean this mess up? It's not about my brother, my sister, my neighbor. It's not about the church. It's me, Lord. I'm in the need of prayer this morning. I need you to address my mess. And he will meet you right at that place. And like the woman at the well, he'll talk with you about it. And he'll show you the next steps to be able to get the plank out so that you can see in a different way. Let him do that this morning, would you? Life's too short to live with a mess. Life's too short. It's too short to blame other people for holding on to your own mess. And it's certainly too short. Life is too short to create a false identity that makes us a liar for the rest of our lives, or that causes us to really be a weed in God's field. Let's pray. Here we are, God. Bunch of messes. You know us inside and out. You know those one-sentence stories that we could tell about what happened to us, where we've been, what's gone on in our lives. You know the mess that we are. And you know that when you put us together in a field in church like this, there's just messes everywhere. A lot of things that people say about us are true, but Right now, I just want to talk to you about me this morning. Would you address the mess in my eye, in my heart? And would you begin that process of forgiveness, acceptance, and healing so that the mess in my life doesn't get messier, but it becomes a message that I can say, come and see a man who knew everything I ever did and yet made me to see. Let it be, O Lord. Make us people who can tell our messages so that others can hear and trust in you to take care of their messes as well. You know, who knows? That could catch on. And we could be part of your cleanup, your great cleanup project of this whole world's mess. Could it be, O Lord? It has to start with me. So I give you my heart this morning, the mess that it is. I give you my eye and the plank that's in it. And would you begin to heal and work on me? I ask you now this for my sake and for the sake of all who hear me. In Jesus'